Hi, friends, and welcome back. I am so excited that you are here. So, we are working in our play along journal, and this is week number 16. So, starting last week, I combined the two videos into one video. That way, in the one video, you can really compare how I start with a very similar spread and turn it into two different things. So, you can take inspiration from that and work in your own journal, whether you are working in a journal that you bought from me or a journal that you made yourself or just a store-bought journal works as well. So I wanted to create this series for a way for you guys to get inside your journal more. I know how intimidating a blank page can be, and I wanted to show you how I go about working in a handmade journal and taking you along for every single step of the way. So this page that I'm working on this week, it has kind of a bonus feature to it. So on the left side, there's a little flip book, and so it gives you additional spaces to work on inside this journal. So I really enjoy my handmade journals to be kind of an interactive process. And when you're looking through them, when they're all done or when you're working in them, there's additional things like flip outs and stuff like that. So I'm excited. Later this year, I hope to come out with a course to teach you all about making handmade journals like I do, all of the flip outs, the tags, the pockets, how I include the envelopes, all of that really good stuff that when you look at it, is kind of like, whoa, how did you do that? So I'm excited that that will be coming out. And right now I have a free course available to you. It is a fringe flip book. I think that you will absolutely love it. I know that I do. It combines all of my favorite things when it comes to mixed media, texture, color, fabric and fibers, all of that good stuff. So I'm starting out here today. I did just a tiny bit of collage with washi tape on the right side of the page. I like to kind of think of washi tape as another piece to use in collage. So almost like your paper, you just combine it all together. So you don't have to think of them as different things, but rather include the washi tape in with all of your collage elements as well. So I drew this little botanical stem flower thing here, and I am not an illustrator by any means. And in fact, this is one of the big reasons why I didn't consider myself an artist for so long. I didn't feel like I could call myself an artist, which I think about it now, and it's kind of silly because art and creativity has been something that has been so ingrained in me since I was a little kid. So I was always that kid that was picking up new creative hobbies and things like that. But when it came to drawing realistically, somehow I got it in my head that that's what an artist was. It was a very narrow mindset, and sometimes society causes us to think like that, or different things shape us growing up that we have those mindsets. So that's been one of the biggest things to kind of break that barrier down in my head and realize that I am an artist. So now when somebody asks me what I do, I can proudly say, I am an artist. I am a maker. I am a mixed media artist. I like to create things. So it wasn't somebody else giving me permission to claim that for my own, but rather accepting it within myself and reframing my mindset a lot. So I did draw this botanical on the right side, and it is something that I've been trying to practice a little bit more. I will have to say that the Stabilo All pencil is one of my favorite supplies when it comes to actually drawing something because of how forgiving it is. So a lot of times I'll draw with a regular pencil first, come back in with my Stabilo All, and then with a damp or wet paintbrush, I can kind of blur those lines, move that pigment around, and I just find it a lot more forgiving. So the style of drawing that I like anyway, um, is kind of a more loose approach. And so the Stabilo All is the perfect tool for that. I wanted to bring some of that grunge that I created on the right side with the flower and bring that to the left side. So I just did some scribbling, and then with a wet paintbrush, I moved some of that pigment around. Now I'm just exploring what all needs to happen. So this page is a little bit more complex than a lot of the other pages because of that flip book feature that's on the left side. I like the small amount of collage that I did on the right side, and so I'm just bringing in some of those elements to the left side as well. So I don't need things to be exactly the same, but there is a imperfect symmetricalness happening. So it's like perfectly asymmetrical, symmetrical. So I don't know quite how to say that, but we can have elements on both sides that kind of read the same, but that doesn't mean that we need things to be exactly the same on both sides. We just want things to feel good, visually appealing. So that's more what I go for rather than any specific rules when it comes to design or composition. Just taking a step back and thinking about how it makes us feel and if things feel balanced in our own minds. So I'm bringing in some white gesso with a dry paintbrush and kind of blurring some of those edges that were made with the collage. I want these two pages to flow together a little bit nicer. So a lot of times white gesso is the supply that I go to for this. It also is a great way to add back in some of that negative space if things are getting a bit too chaotic or too busy. I bring in the white gesso to kind of calm things down a little bit. So I'm opening this little flip out here on the left side and trying to think about what I want to add onto it. So it is a closed page per se, but I also want everything on this page to be really cohesive together. Just like overall with the book, I like things to be cohesive and really flow nicely. But also at the same time letting each page be its own little masterpiece, if you will. So I'm playing around with the thoughts of adding in some fabric and seeing how that works for me. I just folded the fabric and kind of manipulated it until it did what I wanted it to do. And I used my stapler in order to hold that into place. A lot of times I would take it to my sewing machine and stitch that down or hand stitch it down. But if you don't enjoy hand stitching, or if you don't have a sewing machine, or sometimes it's a lot to bring your entire journal under the sewing machine, and that's why I like to do a lot of my elements on the sewing machine before I even bind my journal together. A stapler is a really great alternative. You can also use glue, a strong glue like fabric tack or something like that. Also works really well when you're using fabric in your art journals. So definitely don't be afraid to combine different mediums together. And I feel like that's truly when we reach mixed media, is when we are bringing in all of those different mediums that we love and enjoy and bringing them together under one roof. Overall, I'm keeping things pretty simple. So there's already a lot going on when it comes to this spread because of the original flip out design. And so I don't feel like I need to overdo it. I don't feel that every page here needs to have a ton going on, but rather the simplicity will let it speak for itself, I feel like. So I'm using a few different washi tapes. This is just a really easy collage method to use washi tapes. You don't even have to use glue to adhere it. It already has the adhesive on it. So it makes for a real quick and easy project here. So I'm looking through my little embellishments and my collage bits and seeing if anything kind of speaks to me, seeing what could be added to this page. Overall, I'm pretty happy with it. I kept the inside of that little flip out pretty simple. I definitely could have added more, but I'm happy with how it looks. And it's something that I could always go back to it later and add more if I wanted to. Now I want to jump right into the teal version of the spread. As you can see, the overall basic elements are the same. I have that craft paper on the left side and the little flip out book. So even though the papers are different, the overall feel is the same. So this way you can take the inspiration into your own journal and see what sparks your interest. So not every page that I do I expect everyone to like it or even resonate with it. So you can take the elements that you like and try them out for yourself. I never expect or even want you to have to copy what I'm doing exactly. I think it's great to take what artists do as inspiration and then adapt it to your own style. Now, I will have to say, if you are a beginner just starting out, it can be kind of a daunting thing to even know what your style is. And I don't expect you at all to know what your style is when you're just starting out. One of my biggest tips for those of you that feel like you're struggling to find your style, to find your artistic voice, is to take as many classes as you can. Now, this can be free, like this is here on YouTube, or paid courses, whatever it is. Take in as much info as you can from other artists and see what their style is, see the techniques that they're teaching. And sometimes in the very beginning, your work may look more like their style than yours, but over time you can take all of those different elements that you've learned and adapt them and put your own spin onto things. So don't let not having your own voice or your own signature style from the beginning stop you from starting to create. I know it can be those simple things that hinder us the most from creating because we feel like we need to be unique and different and not like everybody else out there. And I agree. I like to be my own individual person when it comes to artistic things, but sometimes we just need to block out those barriers, those thought barriers, and just start creating and see what comes of it. Sometimes when we can just start creating and get loose, we become inspired and we start to think a little bit less and let our hands do more of the creating. So thinking and trying to be too analytical about your creation process can actually hinder you. As much as it is a nice thing to know where your spread is going before you even start, you don't know how things are going to turn out. I mean, I may start with the idea of what color I want to use or a certain technique, but I try not to have too much planned out ahead of time. I may have like one element that I know I want to try to include. But if we try to plan things out too much, we just get stuck because we have to build up the layers of art, of that creativity to really get to an end result that is interesting and something that we enjoy. So I just placed a little bit of gesso onto the page with my fingers, and this dry method of applying the gesso, I really like the different smudginess that I got. Over top of it, I took my Stabilo all pencil and made some marks, and then with a wet paintbrush, I moved that pigment around a little bit. I really like the look of this where I have the darker piece maybe in the background and then bringing in some small white detail marks on top. That white correction pen is one of my favorite supplies, and it is definitely my favorite mark making supply, or tool, I should say, at the moment. So I tend to go for it and use it in almost everything that I'm doing right now. It dries really quickly and it leaves a really fun texture when it is dry. I'm taking a step back and I'm really looking at how my page is looking. So I really enjoy what I did underneath on the craft paper part, but a lot of that is covered up now. But I liked the vibe that it was getting. I liked the grunginess with the more defined white marks on top. But I'm trying to decide if that piece of teal, the dots that I put on the left side, it's just not quite doing it for me. And sometimes that's okay. We put something down, we get started, and then we realize it didn't work. There are ways to pivot and adapt. We can take it back off, we can cover it up, we can try to make it more grungy, or just paint directly over it. There are several different things we can do. Right now, I'm leaving it on the left side. I'm trying to see if by doing more on the right side of the page, the pristineness of those dots don't bother me as much. But I really like the grungy, dark marks that I made underneath. So I'm kind of bringing that element into the other parts of the spread. I'm continuing to use my Stabilo All to make these kind of bold marks, and I just kind of scribbled it down and then spread the pigment out with a wet paintbrush. And then even on the left side there, as you can see, there's those dark marks. It's kind of like a shadow mark, or maybe even like a ghost mark, I would call it, because I just dipped my brush in the pigment that was on the right side from the scribbles that I made, and took the pigment over to the left side. So you can think about it in the regards as if you were using paint or something like that, where you take it and paint on one side. I want this to dry a little bit if I'm going to be adding marks and other things on top. It is nice to have it a little bit dry. I don't ever have the patience, I feel like, to let things completely dry. I just like to continue working, and I'm usually okay if things are kind of mixing together. It turns out that this really is bothering me on the left side, so I'm just going to take this and kind of peel it up. It's not coming off all the way, but I actually like the way that that is looking. And in fact, I knew from the beginning it needed something on that craft paper, that flap there, because it was just too solid and too plain. So I actually kind of like the grunginess that's there. I'm going to add some white gesso on top of it, and it actually kind of accentuates the grunge from the paper that's left behind. I'm continuing on with these same marks. I know it feels a little bit repetitive, but I like the cohesiveness that everything, that it brings to it, I guess, when you start to flip through this. Those same marks show up, but instead of fighting that and trying to do something different, sometimes that ends up looking a little bit too busy if we force ourselves to do something that isn't coming naturally, I guess I should say. So I used to give myself more of a hard time for making the same marks over and over, and I thought, be more creative, make something different, don't keep doing the same thing. And sometimes I really do like to try to explore and find different marks that come more naturally. But when you're in the creation process, when you're right down in the nitty-gritty of it, don't fight what your instincts are telling you. I think our artistic instincts are something that we train and kind of develop over time. The more we listen to them, the more we trust our gut, the better things will be. And I feel like it will just feel like your overall process feels better to you. You go away after an art session or even during an art session and you feel so much more fulfilled than you do if you spend the entire time fighting with yourself about how things should look or how things should feel. And I think that is a trap that we get ourselves in, that it has to look a certain way rather than just letting things happen as they happen. The middle of this side on the left, this little flip out book, I want some sort of focal interest going on. So I'm going to take, this is a from one of my hand carved stamps that I stamped, and I'm just kind of fussy cutting around it and going to use it as a focal point on the left side. When it comes to fussy cutting, I suggest using a real sharp pair of scissors. I really like this pair from Tim Holtz because it has they're serrated blades, and it's a really comfortable large handle, so your hands don't become as fatigued as you're cutting things out. So those are definitely my scissors of choice for most things that I do. The serrated edge for some reason makes a big difference, I find, when you're cutting things out. So I am just cutting around the edge closely and trying to leave the same distance of white space on the outside. It is not perfect by any means, but I just kind of eyeball it as I go along. I'm trying to decide here what else should go on this spread. I like the idea of putting that botanical horizontally. It's a little bit different than what you normally see, but I kind of like changing it up and doing something different. I used one of my printed stickers underneath. It's going to create just a little bit of interest. I like the background of it, that it's like kind of a gridded background versus doing little plus marks directly onto the dictionary page itself. This helps it just to stand out a little bit more, and it brings in another shape, but it's pretty subtle behind it, which I really enjoy. The right side of this page feels like it needs just a little bit of added something. So I'm taking one of my pre-done embellishments here. This is just a circle that I had punched out, I believe from a jelly plate printing session is the background, and then I just made some marks on top of it, outlined it, and then I think the thing that really brings it all together is the machine stitching that goes around the outside. So this is one of those elements that I really enjoy having made ahead of time, and that way I can pull it out and it's ready to use for things like this in my journal. I'm attaching it here. I have a little brad and I'm attaching it through, and instead of just gluing it down or even stapling it or even sewing it down, I'm using this brad because it creates this kind of swivel effect then. And I could put something on the back of it so that when you swivel the circle out, you kind of see it on the back. But as far as now, I'm going to leave it plain. I can always come back and add stuff later, which is kind of the fun thing. I hope that you guys really enjoyed this spread. This was one of my favorites so far, just for the fact that it is so interactive as you go with all of the flip outs. I hope that you enjoyed watching, and I can't wait to see you next week. Have a good one.